3 years ago, I made this classic Jurassic Park diorama, and I was never happy with it. The outside distracted me, and I put it on so I could do this projected rain so it would be nice and dark. But it just somehow, it never worked. He looks too dry in the scenes, and it's not like I'm going to put a projector there all the time. Then I had building works, and sadly, the canopy, the area around the outside, it did not survive. Neither did T-Rex. I glued him back together, used a bit of paint to fill any of the glue that showed, and before long, he was as good as new. Despite losing its canopy, the rest of the diorama had survived fairly well. I'd ripped off a lot of the vegetation that I'd put to hide the back, and to be honest, a lot of the vegetation did look quite tatty and damaged. It was incredibly dusty though. My first job was to get rid of this unneeded wiring and to give it a good hoover. One thing that always bugged me was I missed the little strip that the Jeeps run along. Oh, and for transatlantic understanding, in Britain we tend to call all 4x4s Jeeps. I think it's from when you guys came over in the Second World War and you bought Jeeps, so we tend to call them Jeeps. But I had an awful lot of comments on it. People telling me it's not a Jeep, it's a Ford Explorer. I think it's just a translation issue. Another thing I needed to sort were these missing corners where the wiring was. One of the great things about doing YouTube videos is you can just go and see how you did it last time. The problem then is recreating it. I actually used a different colour tar grout this time and it did affect the final colour. But this is tar grout. I used raw umber, acrylic paint, just artist acrylic paint, and then still water. And I must have added some normal water as well, stirred it all up, and it just lumps really badly. Then I could fill the corners in. Rewatching the film made me realise there's actually some on the top here. I modelled the strip in sections that looked about the same size. I didn't quite get it right, so I ended up adjusting it in the slicer to make it thinner and narrower, but it stayed the same length. So they're 2-inch long sections. I marked it in, and I can't put it under the Jeep, but it does look like one of the pieces in the film may have just been distorted a bit, so I did that. A quick coat of diluted Tamiya silver was brushed over to give it the shine it needed. I marked in a straight line parallel to the edge, and then I had to sand it flat so that I could get these to sit down into the mud. I used super glue to glue it in place before touching up the new tile grout and weathering that strip with some raw umber acrylic paint. To stop my boy falling off again, I'm using 5-minute epoxy to glue him in place. The problem with keeping a diorama on the side in your bedroom is every day, several times a day, you go past it and you think, oh, I don't like that. And I didn't like the vegetation. It was a bit skimpy. And the vegetation is all by Diorama Precipe. He sent me this amazing box of stuff that I could use in dioramas. So big shout out to him. 3 years later, I've still got quite a lot of it left. I really wanted this cheese plant by Green Stuff World. I have one at home and it seemed nice to put one on the diorama. Plus you can actually see it when the guy runs into the toilet. The rest of it just came out of the box, including this lovely serrated palm that I'd made up. That was in the box too. That's a Diorama Precipe, and everything else I put in place using super glue and Zapper. It's a quick activator. It makes it really simple to just put things in place and it stay there. With the front beefed up, I turned my attention to this area here. It had all got pushed aside in the far corner for the wiring, and it didn't look quite tall enough when you compare it to the shots. So I went through and added some more taller items. Time to bring the rain. And it needs to be a spray so I can do all of the plants. And this is a big diorama, so it won't fit in my airbrush booth. So it was always going to be a spray can. So I chose Halford's Clear Lacquer. You can puddle it up and it dries beautifully. It never crackles, crinkles, wrinkles. It's just great. The other thing that bugged me was the lack of puddles. You can clearly see puddles in the film. I chose to make them with UV resin and chalk pastel. The top ones were umber, the bottoms burnt sienna. But when you look at puddles, they're often a slightly warmer mud colour. It's as if it churns up a slightly different colour. So I went with the burnt sienna. I'm using chalk pastels because they're inert and won't interact with UV resin. And I've picked UV resin because I've had a lot of problems with acrylic products doing horrible things when they dry, cracking being one of the worst of them. I ended up using the puddles in 3 places. The first one being underneath the T-Rex. I also added it at the back to either side of the Jeep. I spent a lot of time moving it around, trying to get it into all the lower spots, making sure it looked reasonable. I even tilted the base so that it would flow a little, and then when I put it back flat, it would be level rather than proud, sticking up, which can be the problem because UV resin is actually quite thick. I put it in front of my homemade UV curing box to cure, but I was worried it wasn't really reaching the back and I didn't want to put the box on top of the diorama. So I went over it with a UV torch as well. It's not that powerful. I prefer to use the curing chamber if I can, and I test it with a toothpick to see when it was set. Finally, the rain spatter. Now, I don't have any of my gloss products other than gloss Mod Podge, and the reason for that is they've all dried up in the bottles over the years. So this is gloss Mod Podge. Ideally, I'd have chosen something with maybe a little bit more body, but I applied it really finely with this sponge brush so I would get a texture that looked like raindrops hitting a puddle. I did make 2 decisions. One, not to put it under the T-Rex because the rain's coming down vertically and he would be sheltering it. And 2, I actually felt the T-Rex needed some. I'm not sure it shows, but I did the T-Rex too. The last thing to do was to cut out this sign. I got it off the internet and printed it on my inkjet printer. Seal it with Mod Podge so it looks wet and won't run or fade over time, and then glue it in place. And the very last thing was to reward my T-Rex for being such a good boy. And if you enjoyed this video and haven't seen the previous one, here it is now.